Today's story, my friends, we are going to talk about what makes a killer. And our teacher for today's lesson is none other than the Crystal Lake slasher, Jason Voorhees. I mean, is it not true that Jason Voorhees have influenced the minds of people and young children into committing murder? At least, that's what I heard from parents, psychologists, and people alike. Introduction: Maggie. A beautiful young woman who went through a tragic experience in her life of losing her mother. Coping with this wasn't easy for Maggie, especially when her father found himself with another woman a few weeks after his wife had died, who ended up becoming Maggie's stepmother a month later. Obviously, her father didn't care for Maggie, nor her mom when bringing this toxic woman into her life. Both the woman and Maggie despised each other, a drunken waste that brought nothing but grief, emotional abuse, and misery upon Maggie, which explains how Maggie ended up making the worst decisions in her life. Like being in a relationship with a guy like Steve, a bad boy who she felt related to, someone that she could experience love with. Except, Steve had a violent way of sharing his version of love. And when showing up to school the next day with the marks and bruises all over her face and body, being teased by the other girls, it was like nobody understood Maggie, her sadness, her anger. She had no direction, no way of talking about the hatred that was building up within her. The school teacher would waste Maggie's time by telling her that she needed to find a way to channel her emotions into something that was more meaningful rather than destructive. The psychologist telling her that there's nothing he can do if she's unwilling to talk about her feelings. The priest who said that he can only advise Maggie to try seek forgiveness or enlightenment instead of vengeance. These feelings within Maggie, the anger, provoking everyone around her, a girl trying to seek revenge when there is nobody to be blamed for the loss of her mother, not Maggie's stepmother, and not even her father. Nobody understood the pain. What was driving Maggie into these horrible yet warming thoughts pinting up in her head, and when coming home facing that drunken waste called a stepmother, realizing that there is nobody who's willing to listen, to help Maggie with her feelings. It was when she noticed this quote posted on the door to her room. It said, "God helps those who helps themselves." That was when Maggie had an idea and decided to take the best piece of advice that she had gotten all day. Calling her boyfriend Steve to come pick her up at 11 at night, Maggie had special plans for Steve that would be worth his time. And knowing that her father and mother wouldn't mind if she snuck out, seeing how they are already dead. Even though Steve was confused that Maggie was directing him to all places, Camp Blood. Of course Camp Blood. It's private. Perfect. Maggie knew what kind of man Steve was, the things he liked, giving a little preview of what's to come. Obviously, Steve wouldn't let some retard in a lake keep him from having some fun. And watching Maggie get out of the car, undressing herself, taunting Steve with the idea of Jason Voorhees being a better lover than him, unless he can prove it. Drawing in Steve with her seductive offering of letting him do whatever he wanted, right here, right now. And just as Steve was about to indulge himself within his primitive fantasy, that was when he felt the knife being driven into his stomach. Finally, the abuser, being the one who's abused, kicking the man into the ground, enjoying the fear on Steve's face. Seeing him go through the same pain as he had put her through, he should have never laid his filthy hands on her. But the fear on Steve's face wasn't because of Maggie. It was Jason Voorhees. And when Maggie saw him, the myth that haunted these woods, towering over both Steve and Maggie, raising his machete, it wasn't fear that Maggie was feeling, but anger when seeing Jason hacking into Steve's body. That was her kill, and after Jason was finished with Steve, that was when he began focusing on the girl. She's been very bad, a girl who must be punished. And even though Maggie pleaded for mercy that she was abused, it didn't sway Jason from wanting to kill this girl for Mother. But before Jason was about to strike Maggie with a machete, that was when she drove a knife into Jason, knocking him onto the ground. Immediately, Maggie went for the machete, standing over the killer, and began stabbing Jason in the neck and chest over and over and over. Not knowing how many times she stabbed Jason with the machete, as if it mattered. When Maggie made her way to Steve's car, the fact is, thanks to Jason, he can now take the blame for the deaths of Steve and her parents. But what was more important is that Maggie will never be touched again. And just as she started the car and was about to drive off, that was when the entire car was lifted from the back. Instead of blind rage, panic began to set in for Maggie, her ignorance being washed away as she started to realize that escaping from Jason Voorhees wasn't going to be that easy. And as Jason tossed the car on its back, watching his victim crawl from the driver's seat, the naughty girl who believed that she had a chance to survive a mother's revenge against all the boys and girls who had done bad things. But Maggie still had a little fight in her. Noticing the car spilling gasoline everywhere, she grabbed Steve's lighter and set the gasoline on fire, causing an explosion that should be enough to take out Jason. And with her body riddled with the cuts and burns from the explosion, it still wasn't enough to save her from Jason. Maggie should have taken the story seriously. The legend, the curse. Jason Voorhees cannot die. He can never die. Of course, there was a part in Jason's story. A boy who loved his mother came back from the grave to avenge his mother's death. And when standing up from the ground, facing Jason, Maggie had finally opened up. And when picking herself up from the ground, facing Jason, that was when Maggie had finally opened up. She loved her mother. And when she died, nobody gave a fuck about her. Nobody cared for her. Nobody but Maggie. Because of that, everybody attacked Maggie. Her father, her stepmother, Steve, the teachers, students, everybody. They are the ones that made Maggie into a monster. There is a reason why she decided to bring Steve here, to Crystal Lake. She wanted to punish Steve. She wanted to punish everybody for the loss of her mother. That's why Jason's story influenced her. A boy who came back from the grave punishing everybody for the loss of his mother. And after telling Jason this, that was when Maggie would take the risk and comfort Jason, telling him that she understands his pain, his anger, and understanding hers as well. So, Jason Voorhees teaches us how to have a serial killer mind. If that were true, I think Jason is terrible at his job. But I do think it's funny how people love giving Jason credit for somebody else's work. You see, Maggie may know about the tragic history of Jason and even find herself relating to Jason in his campaign to avenge his mother's death. But it's funny how even a child can tell you the most important thing about Jason. He kills, and kills, and he will not stop killing. And they will also tell you that Jason Voorhees does not care about Maggie or her problems. Because he isn't just a killer, Jason Voorhees is an unstoppable curse. That was the last thing Maggie learned before Jason dragged her body and decapitated head back into the waters of Crystal Lake.